Now, It Chapter 2 has always been one of my most anticipated film of the last 2 years since the first one came out, the 2017 version, and I was so hyped for this one. And it came out last week, and I watched it, and I really enjoy it. I think they really went above and beyond. They upped the budget of the production, and everything is bigger and just a lot bigger and louder this time. And then I looked online. I looked at the reviews. I looked at what people are saying, and I would say most of the audience enjoyed it, but the critics, on the other hand, it seems like a lot of critics have turned their heads on this one, and I looked up on Rotten Tomatoes. It is now sitting at 63% not certified, the average rating of 6.12 out of 10 with a total count of 318. So it dropped significantly from the chapter 1, and in this video I want to talk about, I just want to give my 2 cents about what the fuck happened, because in my opinion I really liked the first one, and in preparation for the chapter 2 I went back and rewatched the chapter 1, and something lost during that process, during that time, and it wasn't as good as when I first saw it, but it was still a really good movie. I think there are 3 main reasons why this happened, why this shift happened. Where did the 32 million go, as you may see on the thumbnail, which I will explain later. Just what happened during this 2 year that made people think that chapter 2 isn't going to be as good as chapter 1, and after they've seen it, they don't want to be wrong either, so this is what we got. And maybe I want to touch on something at the end of the video, so there's no timestamp this time. I know I like putting timestamp and everything, but there's no timestamp for this video, so stay with me. So let's talk about the first point, the first reason that I think why chapter 2 lost its audience and how it lost it is the hype. The hype behind chapter 1 just isn't there on chapter 2, and I think there are multiple reasons for it. The first one came out in 2017, that was 2 years ago, and from the box office, the opening weekend alone, you can see that chapter 1 clocked in roughly 123 million, while chapter 2 clocked in roughly about 91 million on its opening weekend. There's a 32 million difference in between, and that's a lot. But why? So I think the first reason that happened is because chapter 1 actually came out 27 years later after the original. The miniseries came out in the 1990s, and it was so desperately asking for a fix because there are a lot of things in it that just not well made. I would say that not a lot of people can get into that, especially the second part. So when they announced that they're remaking it in 2017, 27 years later, everyone, the hype was just off the roof. Secondly, I think it has a little to do with the marketing. Obviously, I'm not a genius at marketing. I really don't know the psychology behind the marketing or whatnot. But what I did is that I went back and looked at all the trailers for chapter 1, and I looked at all of the trailers for chapter 2, and then I compared them. And what I found is actually quite interesting. I think the trailers for chapter 1, they set up a better atmosphere. They set up a creepy tone that is gonna pander to a lot of horror fans, but a lot of people who are nostalgic towards Pennywise as well. And a lot of it goes to the music choices. And if you go back and listen and look at their trailers, the chapter 1 trailers, they seem to use this more of creepy and sounds choices to build up this creepy atmosphere. And chapter 2's trailers, however, on the other hand, it's loud. It's super loud, and it sounds like a big Hollywood blockbuster with sci-fi action film with the horns and everything. It sounds like that. So I think there is a difference on marketing. The first one was marketed as this super creepy horror movie. We're gonna make Pennywise good again. We're gonna make it good again.
Because when you're alone as a kid, the monsters see you as weaker. Are you just gonna pretend it isn't happening like everyone else in this town?
And chapter 2, just like, it's almost like, okay, we did that in chapter 1. Now we just want to be louder and bigger and grab more attention with the music choices and the sound effects and everything. So I think that's probably has a little thing to do with that.
Are you
this meeting of the Losers Club has officially begun.
We can do this, but we have to stick together.
Thirdly, and the final thing that I want to talk about in this little section is the fact that we already know what Pennywise looked like. For chapter 2, because of the chapter 1 that came out 2017, we know what Pennywise looks like. We know how he sounds like and how he acts. We know that the actor behind it and how he's going to prepare for this role that a lot of people love. We know exactly what Pennywise is like already. But whereas in 2017 chapter 1, it's been 27 years since we saw a big screen Pennywise. And I think that contributed to a lot of the hype behind chapter 1 that just isn't there or just vanished behind chapter 2. So that's the first thing that I want to talk about. The second major reason that I want to talk about, and the main question of this section, is that where did that lost 32 million go? Where did that go? So here's something that I found when I look at the box office, and I'm trying to see a trend to things. And what I found is that chapter 2 only came out 2 years. Only 2 years after chapter 1. So then I thought, okay, there might be something to do with the release time, because 2 years is so short for a sequel. So to put into perspective, let's see how other franchises keep up their box office after their first one. So I have a couple examples of the first one being the Dark Knight trilogy. All three of them basically came out on the same weekend, but it was released over the span of 7 years instead of only 2 years, with 3 years between the first two, Batman Begins and The Dark Knight, and 4 years between the last two, Dark Knight and The Dark Knight Rises. On the opening weekends alone, Batman Begins made roughly about 48 million domestically. Of course, I'm all talking about domestic. The Dark Knight grossed 158 million on its opening weekend. And then The Dark Knight Rises grossed about 160 million on its opening weekend. So you see this gradual trend of increasing of box office on its opening weekend, even though The Dark Knight outgrows The Dark Knight Rises overall. But looking at the statistic on the opening weekends alone, I think it shows a lot about the hype around it. So the second example that I want to pull from is the Toy Story saga. All four of them, including Toy Story 4 that came out just a few months ago. All four of these installments was released over the span of 24 years. And the first one, 1995, on its opening weekend, it grossed about roughly $39 million. The second one came out in 1999. 4 years later, on the opening weekend, it grossed about $80 million. Toy Story 3 on 2010, after 11 years, on the opening weekend, it grossed about $110 million. Now, Toy Story 4 2019, after 9 years, it grossed about $120 million. So we see this gradual trend again that it seems like the more time you wait, the more box office gross that you're gonna get. But of course, there always are exceptions. For example, Men in Black trilogy or franchise, whatever you want to call it. The first one came out in 1997. The opening weekend grossed about $84 million. MIB 2 came out 5 years later. It grossed about $87 million. So it grossed a little bit more. But the third one dropped. The third one dropped significantly. So the same thing goes to The Matrix. The Matrix 1999 grossed about $37 million. The second one, after 4 years, was about $134 million. And the third one dropped again. Same thing goes to the Planet of the Apes trilogy. The Rise of the Planet of the Apes came out in 2011. It grossed about $54 million after 3 years. Dawn came out. It grossed about $72 million on its opening weekend. And the third one dropped again. So it just seems like it's really unpredictable when it comes to material. Of course, there's a lot of factors that goes into it, the franchise itself and the material that you're working on. And I know that you're gonna say, how can I compare it with all these $1 million franchises? One of some of the biggest franchises out there, like The Dark Knight or Planet of the Apes or Toy Story, Incredibles, or whatever. I'm just saying that there might be a trend. There might be something there. I'm looking at this data over time, and I'm not talking about numbers. I'm just talking about the gross. It seems like all of their opening weekend outgrows the previous installments. And the final example that I want to pull to end this little section is Deadpool. The first Deadpool came out in 2016. On its opening weekend, it grossed about $152 million. 2018, Deadpool 2 came out. Exactly 2 years later, like it Chapter 1 and Chapter 2, it grossed about $125 million on its opening weekend. So what happened in between? What happened to that $27 million that just vanished in between that 2 year? Something that I think is quite interesting to think about. And on the other hand, we have fucking Iron Man 2008, it grows about $102 million. And then 2 years later, we gross $128 million 2 years later. So it's really unpredictable. I think it seems quite common. That's all I'm saying. And the third reason, and I think probably the biggest reason, is something that I talked about a lot of times and for a long time now, is the desensitized audience. I think there are so many big Hollywood blockbusters that are coming out. The CGI technologies are just so well developed. We don't get impressed as much that easy anymore. Whenever I'm talking about desensitized audience, I always look back at, maybe it was last year, I don't quite remember when it came out, Ant-Man and the Wasp. When it first came out, I watched that, I thought it was okay, but the effects, the special effects of it, I thought it really stood out. Yet when I look online or everywhere, no one is talking about how good the special effect actually is in Ant-Man and the Wasp. So that kind of raises my interest on, oh wait, okay, audiences might be a little bit desensitizing over these little things that we used to think are so impressive. And ironically, I think a lot of the cause goes to the superhero movies that have been coming out these days, ironically. And of course, every once in a while you get a standout like Doctor Strange that everyone really liked the movie just because of special effect, but most of the time no one is really talking about it. But when you really look back at it, when the first Avengers first came out, when that movie first came out, it was only 3 years after Avatar. The special effects were just crazy back then. And in 2012, that was the same year that Looper or The Life of Pi or The Dark Knight Rises or Prometheus came out. They came out in the same year. So guess what? 22 movies later, no one gives a shit about special effects anymore. And when I look at Chapter 2, some of the things that caught my eyes are the special effects. Of the third act was fantastic. Some of the transition, that puzzle and star transition, of course, no one is talking about that either. So I think we are getting used to it. We are getting used to these technologies and this new level of storytelling that we don't care, we don't look at it as much anymore. So above all, I think are some of the reasons that I think that 32 million just vanished into thin air, and Chapter 2 lost a lot of audience in between that 2 years and that short time of 2 years. And to just, a little cherry on top to end this video, I want to talk about slightly touch on the culture as well. It's that when we have YouTube and Twitter and all these social media that we get to express our opinion on, as long as it's not good, as long as it's not as good as Chapter 1, people will say that it's not as good by far. And what by far means is that it's not even close, right? So I think it has something to do with culture that we have today and how we as audience or critics are talking about the film itself and how it can influence other people's opinion. So when I say, Chapter 2 isn't as good as Chapter 1, Chapter 1 was better by far, now the whole table has shifted because you set this pedestal that is so high that almost nothing can reach it. But anyhow, I went back to Chapter 2. I watched it again. I watched it twice by now to really think about this movie and how I feel about it, to make up my own opinion. I think Chapter 2 just needs some time to sink in. It probably needs some 1 or 2 years after to really sink into people's memory. That way, maybe the film would be just a little bit better living in people's memory instead of that initial punch, if you know what I mean. So that's it. That's the video, and that's why I think that 32 million just poof out of nowhere. So yeah, tell me what you think of Chapter 2. Did you like it? Did you think it was better than Chapter 1? I don't think it was better than Chapter 1, but it was still a pretty damn good horror movie, and it's so entertaining. So that's it. I'm gonna leave this video. That's it. That's all I'm gonna talk about. Tell me what you think of the video and everything that I talk about. It's interesting. If you see some more stuff that I didn't see, definitely tell me in the comments, and I'll see you next time. Bye.